welcome back to another episode of Undefeated, where we are lifting the lid on debt constraint to live life without limits. I'm your host, Bree Franklin, and I have coming up for you all another amazing episode of our series that we are now a little bit more than halfway through. I just looked at our schedule a few days ago and couldn't believe that we're already so many episodes deep into our first season that you all have been consistently and faithfully tuning into, which we're so appreciative of. We thank you for all the glowing feedback, all the kind words of encouragement, and also just sharing some tips for how we can make it an even better series and experience as we keep rolling it out in the months and years ahead. So I'm really excited by today's episode, guest and conversation topic, because I think everything absolutely happens in the reason and season in which it's meant to. This individual is someone who first caught my attention when I was at South by Southwest last spring. So we're now coming up on that 1 year anniversary, which is insane. And seeing her take the stage and just espouse so much wisdom and knowledgeability about being a woman of faith in the workplace, it was a very compelling conversation. And so I shot my shot and was fortunate to have got a very enthusiastic and hard yes in terms of her appearing on Undefeated. So to share with you a little bit more about who is going to be talking with me on conscious stewardship creation today, we have Nona Jones, who is an innovator, author, speaker, and survivor. Nona is a rare combination of preacher, business executive, author, and entrepreneur. She currently serves as global ambassador for YouVersion, publicly championing its family of 715 million plus downloaded Bible apps. Her corporate leadership experience includes serving as the Chief Content and Partnerships Officer at YouVersion, Head of Global Faith Partnerships at Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, and Chief External Affairs Officer for a multi-state school for at-risk girls. She's the best-selling author of Killing Comparison, which I've read and can vouch for, and Success from the Inside Out. She will release her highly anticipated new book, The Gift of Rejection, in October of 2024, and has been profiled by Essence Magazine as an under 40 woman to watch and Florida Trend Magazine as one of Florida's 30-something all-stars. She is a graduate of Leadership Florida and the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program, a joint initiative of President George W. Bush and President Bill Clinton. Without further ado, I am so excited to welcome to Undefeated Nona Jones.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Thank you again for being our guest. I'm going to do my best to not fangirl and just keep a cool head as we go through our conversation. So glad to have you here today.
I'm glad to be here and thank you for that wonderful introduction. That was very kind of you.
Absolutely. As I, preface, there's so much here that I know we'll be able to unpack. I know I just read the curated version of your bio and story, but obviously that doesn't do it nearly enough justice. So if you would just fill in the blanks, share a little bit about your background, how you got into this work, and then also just the tie into your debt story.
Sure. Well, you did a fantastic job sharing the highlights of my resume. What I would say the most important part of my resume for me is that I am a follower of Jesus. And so I take my faith into everything that I do. I've been very, very blessed to have a wonderful career. I've been in executive leadership for corporations across sectors for the last 17 years. And while that is awesome and I love everything I've learned from it, I think the ministry side is what's most important to me. I've been in ministry since I was 17. My husband and I will celebrate 20 years of marriage this year. I graduated college in 2004 and I got married 1 month after I graduated. And so it's just amazing to say 20 years because that feels so long. And it is long, but it's been a blessing. I have two boys. They are 14 and 11. And so I am a mom. And yeah, I get to do a lot of really, really awesome things. I think in terms of my debt story, I grew up in a home with a mom who she had a lot of extravagant taste. And she didn't teach me at all about money, but I do remember her just being in a lot of credit card debt. Like I remember her talking about the bills and how she had to work so much because she had to pay off the credit card bills. And so I saw the amount of, I think, like pressure and stress that she felt. And when I was about to go off to college, I received in the mail my first credit card just in the mail. And I cut it up because I was like, I don't want no part of what, she has going on. But I did open up a debit card because I was working a part-time job. And so I got a debit card. And I think, from early on, I've just seen money as a resource, but I've seen it as something that I need to be, careful of to make sure that it doesn't control me, that it is something that I use in order to be a blessing to other people and to my family. So, there was a period in my marriage where we've always owned our own home, but my husband had some student loans. I was fortunate to go to college, debt-free undergrad. I had a full academic scholarship. But when I went back to college for my master's degree, I had to take out some loans for that, but paid that off really, really quickly because I definitely believe, and the Bible even talks about this, about the borrower being slave to the lender.
Mhm.
And so I've never wanted to be in that situation where I owe somebody money. So my work ethic has been as strong as it has been because I really believe that it's important to be debt free and to live a life where you are not constrained by interest rates and trying to, borrow from Peter to pay Paul. And that just isn't a way to live. And so, that's kind of been my philosophy is if you can pay cash, pay cash. I do have a Sky Miles credit card that I use to, get some free points, but I pay off everything that I charge immediately. So
Yeah.
not everybody has that level of discipline, but that's what I do because I want to make sure I'm debt free.
Beautifully said and beautiful story. And there are like so many things here. You've addressed different types of debt. So the credit card piece, also student loans, but more importantly, your philosophy and your outlook. As a practicing Christian, I basically took it upon myself to do like a Bible intensive the year before last, like starting in fall 2022, that continues to present day. And so having read it and reread it, I've seen, the scripture that actually backs that up because you always hear it just espoused or taken out of context or just people kind of turn it into their own whatever. But I was like, okay, seeing it in plain text right there, that's really helpful for framework. But even in Nehemiah, like chapter 5, 7 through 11, that's a little bit harder to commit to memory, but the sum of it is, do not charge the people interest and you dialing in on that piece specifically, because that is what can make debt so dangerous if you don't have the discipline, if you don't know what you're doing. It's a slippery slope and it goes very quickly from, okay, just this one little charge that, I gotta have it now, but I don't have the money, but I'll take care of it when I get paid. And it's easy to think that, and certainly it's possible to take care of it, but then it gets tempting to open that door wider and be like, I'll take on a couple more items on credit because then, like it'll be worth it, right? And so I just feel like the attitudes of discipline are so important. And I have a lot of friends who had that same ideology of like, my only credit card is just for emergencies and to pay things off on time. And I'm wondering, just being a college student, when you had first gotten confronted with that, did you ever have any sorts of pressure? Because I want our audience, some of whom is at that age group, just to hear what it was like and just any tactics that you might have had to employ to ward off the negative temptation.
Sure. Well, so I ended up in a really interesting situation in college. So I had a full academic scholarship. So, my tuition was paid for, my lodging, my room and board was paid for. And then I also had multiple other scholarships because I was like a National Merit Scholar. And so I had at the end of each semester, after tuition was paid, books were paid, lodging, food, all that was paid, I had about $5,000 just left over at the end of every semester. Okay. And what I did wrong, and I thank God that I didn't do this with credit, but frankly, I did it with cash. What I did wrong is I just went to the mall and I had a good time. I went to JC Penney, I went to Express, I went to all these stores and just bought clothes that I don't have one piece of those clothes anymore. And so one of the things that I would have loved to have done if I had had someone to speak into my life at that time, if I should have saved that money. I mean, and when I think about the course of all the semesters, I mean, I didn't really take time off. So I entered college as a first year sophomore, and I would go to school even during the summer because I didn't have a good relationship with my mom, so I wouldn't go home. And so I had probably about, let's see, 5, 10, I might have had about 15,000 extra dollars every year just sitting around. So I could have had $60,000 that I could have done something with. Like I could have put a down payment on a house or anything like that. But again, I did not have anyone to advise me on what to do with that money. And I didn't even think to seek counsel for it. So looking back on it, even though I did not, I mean, of course, I received credit cards in the mail, but I didn't need them because I had cash. So I kind of spent the cash the way that some people spend on credit. So in that sense, I'm grateful because I ended college. I did not have any credit card debt, but I also didn't have any of my cash either because I spent all
Broke
um,
even.
listen, I was just broke even. But so that to that extent, that is a blessing. But if I had it to do over again, man, I really would have saved that money and invested it. That would have been awesome.
Mm. Wow. I mean, it's interesting to hear it from that side because I almost only ever hear that in terms of oopsie daisy, I did that with debt. Like I did that with a credit card. I did that with my student loan money, just as people make that fumble. So, like you said, great thing that it was, if you're gonna trial and break things and make mistakes, that it was with cash and that it really didn't, set you behind. I mean, I guess in a sense, right? Like you said, it could have been invested, it could have grown and become something of value and equity, but it's definitely, I would say, a milder way to learn that lesson because then it's just like, okay, now you're starting fresh, as opposed to in a deficit, which is just so hard. Well, once you get yourself in particularly deep. I would love to hear your take on just, your attitude. As you mentioned, your husband had student loans, and this is something that I see a mixed bag of reviews on. So I have not been married as of yet. And I therefore just kind of sit back and listen because I'm like, I'm, not going to armchair coach something I can't even speak to.
Sure.
But I'm curious, like some people believe I'm not getting married until I'm debt free, or I won't marry someone with debt if I don't have any. Like I'm not going to let you jack up my credit. So I'm curious as to whether that ever created any imbalances or if y'all were still pretty much united in terms of facing that together.
Great question. And you kind of mentioned it earlier that there's different types of debt. Now, unfortunately, because of the way that society is set up, I would say that most people who go to college do have student loan debt. Like
Right.
that's just what kind of happens. And so I think to the extent that they have student loan debt, that feels a bit different than if they just have like multiple maxed out credit cards. Because when I think about like the kind of credit card debt, in some ways that speaks to more of a lack of discipline. That speaks to more of a kind of I need it now type of situation. And that would raise some questions. Like I do think that it'd be important to have the conversation with the person to be like, hey, what is the nature of these credit cards, and like why have they been used? Because I believe that past performance is the best indicator of future performance. And so someone who they're charging on their credit cards things like clothes and shoes and trips and those types of expenses, in my humble opinion, are not the best way to use a credit card, because what that essentially says is I cannot wait.
Yeah.
Like I don't have the ability to wait to save money for this. And so that, from the standpoint of someone you're thinking about marrying, I think that would be more of a question. The student loan piece, again, that's less of a question for me because that's just more common. I think people tend to have to fund their education through that type of debt, especially in the Black community, because we don't tend to have generational wealth or assets where our families can pay for our education. So we do tend to take out loans. I do think that credit card debt, that would be kind of questionable to me, because again, it just speaks more to character than anything. Now, having said that, if there's a situation, and I think this is still, again, it's a conversation point. If there's a situation where somebody has credit card debt because, for example, they had to help their family, like let's just say,
Right.
their parents were struggling, they, were hospitalized and they had to use their credit cards in order to pay for the expenses for their family. That's less a character issue and that's more a situational issue. I do think you still need to have the conversation though, because if that is a chronic issue where, their family needs their money or they need them to kind of bankroll them, you will have challenges in your marriage. So I just think it becomes a conversation point. What is the nature of the debt? Why was it created? And is this a character issue or is this more, environmental, or is this just kind of an ad hoc situation? I would have that conversation.
That's solid. That's really, really sage advice and wisdom. So for anyone else tuning in who is on this side of marriage, right? Like hasn't yet found that person and making that made that commitment. I think that's really important to bear in mind is it's circumstantial and it can't just be looked at as a hard, all or nothing lens because like you said, even with credit cards, sometimes it really is a means to an end, like having to help a family member out in a pinch for medical issues, and you're, everyone's only bet for being able to get through that obstacle. So obviously, like doing your research, doing your due diligence, that makes total sense. And it also gives me hope too to know that it's not inherently a deal breaker for all couples, because I think some people tend to just be very draconian and just dismiss, like, nope, I'm not taking that on. Like, you're cool and all, but you're not worth that. And so I think that sort of speaks to broader issues, perhaps in a relationship, and knowing that that doesn't have to be the end all be all. So thank you for giving a little bit of insight into how that's played out, in your marriage vein. Um, as we're coming up on these last few minutes, I would love to just see if there's any like advice and action, just a quick sage point that you can share with our audience as it pertains to conscious stewardship and being a guardian of your finances. Obviously, like you're immensely successful, and I'm in so many ways trying to get like you. I'm really not just saying that, faith, family, finances, you've got it all. And so I'm curious, like, how would you sum up being able to move that piece forward for someone who is struggling to get their footing in those realms?
I first of all, thank you for your very kind words. I think you have to be willing to make the commitment to stewardship because look, we live in a society where there's so much pressure to live up to this ideal, right? Like you want to have the expensive bag, the expensive car, and take the, expensive trips and have the perfect, husband and the perfect wife. And like, there's this pressure. I call it manufactured pressure though, because the reality is many times people who have those things don't have peace. And so for me, the real flex is not having the Birkin bag. The real flex is having peace without it. And so I would just say, in all of your pursuing and getting and acquiring and all of that, make sure that what is driving you is the peace that you have on the inside of you. And that is not something that you can buy at any retailer. That is not something you can buy from anyone. One of the habits that I employed a few years ago, because I found myself in a season where I was very influenced by what I was seeing on social media, and I felt pressured to, buy the expensive shoes and the bags and all the stuff. What I started doing is whenever I felt like I needed to buy a bag in order to, I guess, prove I had arrived, instead of buying the bag, I would actually buy the cost equivalent in the stock of the company that manufactured the bag.
There you go.
And what I started to do is I started to change my I think my admiration. It was no longer for the bag. It was like I want to see what the stock price is doing. And so when I see somebody wearing the bag, I'm like, thank you, because I'm not in competition with you. You're actually helping me because you're increasing my stock value. So that was one kind of shift I made that has been, I think, really, really helpful because it did a couple of things. Number one, it helped me to not see the value in the material thing, but instead in the price, the value, the asset that it could provide, which what it did for me is it helped to decouple my identity from the material thing. And that's really, really important. So I would just give that advice because again, we're in a social media world. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of, there's a lot of value that seems to be placed on having stuff. But in fact, instead of having stuff, you need to be increasing your asset value, your portfolio value. That's what I would say.
Very wise. I've heard that approach mentioned before, like when it comes to Nike or, other high fashion brands, like invest that in the stock and then let that pay off in dividends. And then you can definitely break yourself off with the returns on whatever item. But like you said, it's a long-term game. To follow that up, which is very hard to do, but I'm going to try. I would say referencing, the title of your book, which again, I read last summer, kill the need for comparison. Don't think that just because like all your friends have these virtue signaling material things or take certain types of trips that your value is any less because you can't compete with that. Because little known secret is that there are just so many people who live wildly outside of their actual means. And
Yes.
when you take away all the airs and facades, you'll see that people are actually not doing nearly as great. In many cases. Sometimes it is exactly as it looks, but just don't be fooled. Kill the need to compare. So with that, we've reached our time for today's episode. But again, Nona, thank you so much. This is like an amazing, amazing midweek boost for me up here in chilly New York. And I thank you again for all the wisdom that you've been so kind as to share with our audience.
This has been my pleasure. And thank you for creating the platform to share this type of content with people who need it. I think this is a wonderful ministry, and I'm grateful for you.
Well, thank you. More soon, hopefully in even bigger and better ways as we wrap up this season and get to our next. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll be back again.